All right, we're back crack-a-lackin' on the Candida topic. Welcome back. You know the drill. I'm Nikki. This is Amy. We're the IBS Freedom Podcast co-host extraordinaires. Amy, you want to start us off on the right foot with the Candida conversation? Now, mind you, I don't know if this is going to make the episode more intriguing or less intriguing. We did do an episode on Candida back in season 1. We're going to expand on that. We're going to talk about some new stuff. So if you want to listen to both episodes, go for it. The audio is going to be smoother and silkier in this episode, surely. But that being said, this is like Candida revisited. What do you want to tell the good people at home?
Well, I think I'll start by saying you need to completely eliminate every carb to beat Candida.
You have to do keto, right?
If you even have 1 grain of rice, that Candida will bloom.
Yeah. And you lose the battle.
You're going to regret it. You're going to regret that grain of rice.
Absolutely. Hopefully, let's just laugh and point out that we're totally joking. I hope it's funny because you always hope that new people find each episode. Right?
Right.
But also, like, if this is somebody's first episode with us, they're like, oh my God. So we were being extremely facetious and joking. That was beautifully executed. I think that we could win awards for our acting right there.
Yes.
But that is the conversation out in the world, right? Like,
it's the noise.
All carbs, all sugar is bad. You can't eat potatoes, you can't eat rice, you can't eat bread, you can't eat, heck, a lot of Candida diet variations say you can't have sugar, you can't have fruit, which is taking it a couple notches above and beyond where you need to be. We are big fans. I'm going to speak for the registered dietitian here, and hopefully she's going to agree with this. I've only known you for how long now, but we are both bigger fans of moderate diet templates. If you are going to use a template, I think we're much bigger fans of like healthy eating. So obviously part of healthy eating is to not overdo it on sugar and junk food 24/7. But I don't think it has to be any super strict thing. And I guess, by the way, you kind of inadvertently or maybe intentionally decided that we're talking about the diet piece of Candida first and foremost.
Okay.
We're gonna start there.
Okay.
Hold on, let me scroll, as you could probably hear my wheel on my mouse going to town. Amy, my milkshakes are gonna bring all the boys to the yard. Are you ready for this?
I'm ready.
Are you ready?
I'm strapped. I'm buckling up.
Okay.
Okay. I'm strapped in.
I wanted to bring something different to the people. Right? Because again, I said, we've already discussed Candida. Why would they tune in for this episode when we have another perfectly wonderful episode about Candida? So I was doing a little bit of digging, and I wanted to bring up some things that have not been said on this podcast yet in regards to Candida. And I found one that I'm especially pumped about. The whole like starving the Candida and like no sugar, no carbs thing might actually be 100% ass backwards. I've never really gone to try to verify that. Honestly, like it's just something that's widely accepted in like the health space and the internet, and people just believe it. And to be honest, I haven't previously like gone to really verify it all that much. I happened to stumble on a blog that mentioned a couple of studies, and I went and checked out the resources or the articles. Very interesting. So there was one, for example, where they showed that killing of the Candida, they took neutrophils, white blood cells that would normally kill Candida. They took neutrophils from diabetic patients, so people who clearly have blood sugar issues, right, and high blood sugar. The killing of the Candida was impaired under conditions of high sugar exposure and in a state of ketosis.
Damn. Yeah.
So, you know, you take, say, like a patient and you think, ooh, gosh, golly gee, let's get these people into ketosis. Well, apparently ketosis is also going to impair neutrophil phagocytosis of Candida. So again, maybe happy medium, like maybe don't eat all the candy and the Pop-Tarts and the cookies, but also like, I don't think you need to go to the extreme of doing keto or getting yourself into ketosis either. Like again, moderation, like a more moderate, just plain old boring, simple Sally healthy diet. Also, this was interesting. This is a different article. They said that basically they pointed out that Candida can not only produce some ketones, but it can use them for fuel. Which again, you would never hear this in a million zillion years in like the keto health space. They would prefer that this probably be buried. But they said, again, that Candida can produce and metabolize some ketones. And then one more for you is that there was a study, I think this might have been a Petri dish study, but I can't swear to that. Another study, a little bit older, right around the turn of the millennium, said they observed that trying to starve the Candida made the cells exponentially grow. And they basically talked about and this makes sense if you think about it this way. They said something to the effect of starvation is like the Mayday SOS, holy crap, this is getting real, we might die kind of moment for the Candida or bacteria. Maybe this has overlap with SIBO too. But it's basically like a Mayday signal. And then the Candida's response is, okay, we have to be beefier and stronger, and we have to overcome this hardship. And the Candida actually grew exponentially under states of starvation. So what the heck are we doing where, not we, but like we as a broader community, like what are we doing telling people that they have to restrict their diet down to nothing? Like you can't eat sugar, you can't eat fruit, you can't eat any carbohydrates whatsoever. You can't eat foods that contain mold. Actually, interestingly, there was another study that I didn't write down, but I saw another study that components of food-based yeasts, so like Saccharomyces cerevisiae being one, components of food-based yeasts actually inhibit the growth or the virulence of Candida species.
Dang,
so I don't know, like maybe you should be eating more like corn and wheat and peanuts and cashews and all of the like moldy foods. Maybe you should be eating more of those. I don't know. Like I think that it starts to poke holes in the dietary restriction for Candida conversation, certainly.
Yeah, I definitely have heard that, yeast can consume ketones. That conversation, I remember when I heard that just because that kind of blew my mind when I first initially read that, because I was going through my gut journey and having some fungal stuff and being like, oh shoot, like that's not good. If I'm in ketosis or too low carb, like I could be feeding the beast in some way. I think just in general, it goes to show that the situation isn't as simple as just starving things. And again, like things are resilient. So Candida's resilient. It can survive off ketones. It can survive off potentially sugar. It can survive off a bunch of different stuff. Like you want to have a robust immune signaling, and potentially being in ketosis isn't necessarily the most optimal immune signal for someone that has Candida too. Like
we're gonna get so many comments. People, the keto people are gonna come for us, and they're gonna be like angry in the YouTube comments on this one. I'm loving it.
Yeah, but like I think, oh gosh, who was the Sarah Ballantine? She's Paleo Mom or something.
Yeah, Paleo Mom.
She wrote an article about like insulin. That was really interesting. Again, like saying like how important insulin is. Like it always gets a bad rap.
Ask a type 1 diabetic and they will agree with you.
Right. I think again, like it's the same I think if you're starting to dip a little bit too low carb and insulin signaling really majorly decreases, I think that that really affects the immune system in weird ways too, to where like, again, the immune system starts to downregulate some of the stuff that's really important for, again, regulating microbes. I also just think in general, like hormones get skewed. You have thyroid hormone potentially decreasing because insulin's low. And then it's like, cortisol is having to work overtime to balance blood sugar. You have all these like hormonal perturbations when you go so low carb that, it's going to affect the immune response. It's going to affect motility. It's going to affect, your ability to regulate microbes in the gut with all these hormonal changes that happen when you go into ketosis. And it's not necessarily to say that like you couldn't potentially do it therapeutically for a period of time or something like that. But like the idea that you can really starve the fungal overgrowth by going really low carb, I've never seen it be super successful. Maybe again, like if someone switched from like a very just bad diet to begin with, like again, maybe they're eating kind of like a standard American diet and they go to like more of a whole foods keto, like more ketosis type diet, they might be like, oh my God, I feel better. But then there's no reference range for just a balanced plate. And then it backfires long term.
Yeah, well, and that's something I think we've talked about it because we did a whole episode on keto, right? Like maybe in like the 80, 90 something range for like end of season one.
Yeah, I feel like it was before I went on leave, definitely.
It was definitely
like
before you went on leave.
Closer
I think it was
to the end.
Towards the end.
Right.
We also did a whole episode on like plant-based diets and vegan diets. And I think something that we talked about in both of those episodes, and I felt for a really long time with a lot of these diets, is that they're just overshooting beyond what is necessary oftentimes. So like, if you go from one side of the spectrum being the standard American diet, devoid of fiber, lots of simple carbohydrates, lots of sugar, lots of saturated fat, not much color, just a lot of like brown, shitty fried food. Like if you go from that and then you just add colors and vegetables and fiber and like add produce and add just good nutrition, that would probably be adequate for the vast majority of people. But then it's like we overshoot and we get in this mindset of like, oh, I have to eliminate this bad thing. And yeah, like if you go from standard American to vegan, you're probably going to feel really good. Or if you go from standard American to paleo, you're probably going to feel really good. But is it because of the subtractions? Is it because of the strictness? Or is it because you're actually eating fruits and vegetables now?
Right.
I mean, I feel like it's the latter. And again, you could still accomplish that and you could still get the benefit of that by being more moderate, just eating kind of like a classically healthy diet, right? Like something ballpark close to a Mediterranean template. Maybe you want to add a little bit more vegetables and a little bit less carbs than that, depending on the person. But like, I think ballpark, the Mediterranean diet is a good place for a lot of people to land or something close to it. I don't think we need to do these unnecessarily restrictive diets. And I feel the same way with the Candida conversation and the SIBO conversation. Like you need fiber. And this is one thing I want to stress. The number one focus for an anti-Candida diet has nothing to do with sugar. I would actually be perfectly fine if somebody had Candida and they were eating like a bit of chocolate. The number one focus that you need to focus on is getting enough quantity and variety of dietary fiber, because that's what's going to feed your good bacteria. And then the good bacteria will inhibit the Candida for you. And then you don't have to do as much of the heavy lifting with antimicrobials and antifungals and sugar restriction and all of that crap. You could let the microbiome do a lot of the heavy lifting, a lot of the work for you. But again, that is contingent on feeding them lots and lots of different fibers and plenty of it. So that needs to be the focus. But again, like when you focus on restriction, primarily of like, I can't eat this, I can't eat that, I can't eat that, I can't eat that, naturally a lot of people end up eating less fiber than they could otherwise eat. So in my mind, eat the potatoes, eat the rice, like try to do like brown rice instead of white rice, but that's just a general like healthy thing to do. I don't know if we need to overcomplicate it beyond like what we've been taught in Nutrition 101 and what we would get from like a Mediterranean kind of template anyway. Like stop overthinking it.
And I think that two things. First, I think if you are doing the restrictive route too, it not only depletes fiber and potentially has microbiome effects that wouldn't be helpful. I also think, again, like it just stresses you out, stresses your body out. For most people, again, I don't think most people operate super well on low carb. It's not something I've seen, especially across time. I think some people can do okay with being a little bit lower carb, but like generally, especially very low carb, I don't see people having very good long-term results doing that. And it's stressful, and usually no one wants to be eating that way. So it's like you're stressed, you're potentially having hormonal changes, you're potentially having microbiome changes, like all the defenses
your sleep
that
is out of
keep,
whack because
right.
you're not making melatonin worth a crap anymore.
Right. It's like all your defenses that would keep Candida in check kind of go out the window when you go really low carb. So like from my standpoint, you lose all your defenses or a lot of them when you go really low carb for Candida. I had another thought and it just flew out the brain. But here's what it was. I also think, again, like what you're describing where you really want to build up fiber and eat a variety of different fiber, to me it's like analogous in a lot of ways like how we sort of both see SIBO at this point. Like you don't always have to do a super like a ton of clearing even for fungal issues. Like if other things get locked into place and you can maybe do it in a gentle way where you're just really focusing on helping the environment as a whole just like slowly get back into balance versus doing something like pruning. Some people might need a little bit of pruning and a couple antifungals. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I also think there's a lot of people that might not need like even that. They might just need balancing out these defense systems that help keep Candida in place, eating like a generally healthy diet, working on stress, working on sleep, but also really working on diversifying their diet, maybe doing prebiotics, like kind of a gentle approach like that. But again, I think the message tends to be you need the aggressive approaches.
Yeah.
You need to like, it's super insidious. Like I feel like there's a super insidious mindset. It's the same thing in the SIBO space. Like you need to clear. There's no alternatives given. But again, I think there's so many people that could just do well spending time just gradually trying to shift the microbiome and focus on doing things that are going to be generally helpful for the systems that keep the environment healthy and happy. Again, like it's kind of a bummer that we're like, I feel like primarily one of the few peoples, that's a word, few peoples
sure.
that talk about this stuff. Cause I think there tends to just be like, how can you kill a Candida? You know, it's like the same aggressive type mentality for SIBO comes into play with Candida. And it's like, do we really have to be like that? Like, like warrior mentality, tribal mentality of like killing the Candida. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think two things. I want to come back to the SIBO conversation because I have something specific to weigh in on. But if you think about it though, like this is terrible, especially because I'm saying this on my podcast, but the internet was designed to scare you and make money off of you.
Right.
Honestly, like those are the two primary functions of the internet. If you think about advertisements that you see, a lot of them are trying to speak to your pain points. A lot of them are trying to scare you Well, so what is scarier? The conversation we're having of like, yeah, like everybody has some candida. Practically everybody has some candida in their gut. You're never going to get rid of it, but you can live in harmony with the little bit of candida, but you need to do these unsexy, unglamorous, basic B things to support your health, and
You
that will
said basic
support.
B in the last 2 episodes, Nikki.
Yeah, I'm feeling it today.
I
What
love
can I
it.
say? But like, it do the basic stuff, try to lead a healthy life, try to eat a healthy diet and run with that, and that'll take care of what you're experiencing. Like that's not a very scary conversation. It's a very down to earth, practical viewpoint. And like there's nothing really proprietary in that, right? Like
Right.
okay, just eat a healthy diet. You don't need anything. Versus just to paint a different picture. If I super wanted to like manipulate you, the listeners, not so much Amy, but I'm talking to you. If I wanted to manipulate you and get you to like give me your email address so I could market shit to you down the road, I first have to scare you or otherwise convince you that you need to get on my email list. So I might make a post about, oh, the only candida diet that works. All the other candida diets are terrible and they're going to feed the candida, but you need my special dietary template. And you can only get it if you join my email list right now, or if you give me $9.99 plus shipping and handling, whatever it might be. But there has to be that like fear and that urgency and that like, oh, I need that thing. Or similarly, oh, you need to nuke the candida. What are you doing? Of course, you can't just treat it with like natural basic B stuff. Of course, you need the fancy proprietary herbal blend
Right.
that I developed and I packaged and I'm conveniently selling to you on my website. Amy Myers. Like, the people, Amy Myers, Dr. Ruscio, like they have some great resources, but also a lot of their websites are very clearly targeted at convincing you you need to buy their product and you will not get better without their product. So
Yeah.
just keep that in mind. Like Candida is a great example of this, and SIBO too, where like influencers and the internet in general is trying to motivate you by scaring you or speaking to a pain point, and they're trying to convince you that you need their thing because that's how they ultimately make money off of you. But you're never going to see a Facebook advertisement saying, hey, like you could just eat a healthy Mediterranean diet. You could even have a little bit of sugar and you could still treat your candida and you'll be totally fine. Don't worry about it. You're never going to see that because nobody's going to spend the money on the Facebook advertisements to put that in front of you because they're not going to make money off of it. So just
We should actually make some ads like that. That'd be hilarious.
we should, honestly. Like we should or like,
Like
I've always
total total
joked
basic
that
B.
like we see like billboards and advertisements for pharmaceuticals, but there's no such thing as like a billboard for broccoli. We should just do that. We should have like a picture of a billboard and then we just like go in Canva and we just put a piece of broccoli on a billboard and that's the entire Facebook ad.
Right.
Nothing else. No words.
Right.
No words. No nothing. Just and then the word, maybe I should do this just for fun. And then the only word like the copy that you have to attach with the Facebook ad, the
Right.
only thing that it says is broccoli, period. And that's it.
Or like eat your broccoli.
No, not even that. That's too much. Just broccoli, period.
Okay. I'll let you
I'm gonna do
have
this.
that.
I'm going to do it just for funsies because what'll probably happen is that people will be like, what the F is this?
Right.
And then I'm going to get really good comments that I can share later here. Or people will click on my profile because they'll be like, what is this? And then
Right.
maybe they'll want to follow me. I don't know. Maybe this
Oh
is
my
like the
God.
best hack I ever came up with. Or there
Right.
could be a million variations.
Confusion isn't a bad thing. It's funny in marketing school, in grad school, we were learning that like even annoying ads, like ads that are like outright just like obnoxious,
Yeah.
can be really successful in terms of like memory and again, isn't a bad thing. Even if like someone has like a negative connotation towards the ad, like it still can bring, if your goal is awareness of a product or awareness of something, sometimes like an annoying, obnoxious like songs or
It works.
actors, that kind of thing. Yeah.
I was going to share, to date myself a little bit, as an elder millennial, I will share to this day, and until the day I die, I will forever remember that really obnoxious song with like the old person who dances, like, or should I say the person in a costume to look like an old man, and he's like dancing really crazily for Six Flags.
Yeah.
And he's just going bonkers, but he looks like 85. Like, I
Right, he's
still
going
have
after
that
it.
so imprinted on my brain, I can't get rid of it. It will live in my brain forever. And that's like stuff like that. Like, you just remember it for the rest of your life. So yeah, I agree.
Too funny.
But anyway, back to Candida. I don't know how the Six Flags guy made it into this podcast, but case in point, he will live forever in my memory. Or the actor who portrayed this old man. The SIBO thing I wanted to mention real briefly is, again, like this idea, I wish I could doodle it for you people on the screen right now, but if you think of, you need microbiome diversity, bacterial diversity, and you need quantities of good bacteria to inhibit the yeast. So if you take away bacterial diversity and quantity of good bacteria, you're going to take the brake pedal off of the Candida machine. And we know now that the two major things that influence bacterial diversity and numbers of good bacteria in the gut, number one, antibiotics. So not surprisingly, people get Candida overgrowth after they take an antibiotic. That's the classic, you take an antibiotic for sinus infection or whatever infection, and then boom, you get thrush, or you get a vaginal yeast infection, or you get like weird tummy stuff that ends up being Candida. So antibiotics are very well known for doing that. The other thing, though, is restricting your freaking diet. So we see all of these people who are told that they have SIBO, and then like the 1-2 punch, the knee-jerk reaction is, oh, you have to go on this super strict diet. And, it's either low FODMAP or SCD or biphasic. Any way you look at it, every single one of those diets is restrictive. And I wonder in a weird way, like, could there be an evil villain, like Power Ranger style? Like there's an evil villain in like a cave tucked away somewhere in the mountains, and their goal in life is for everybody to have Candida. And they're like, ooh, ha ha ha, how do we give more people Candida? Oh, we'll tell everybody that they have SIBO, and then they're going to restrict their diet, and then everybody will get Candida because they thought they were treating SIBO, but actually they gave themselves Candida. Like, I could see this almost being a conspiracy theory, but I swear to God that's happening. People may or may not start out with SIBO or just bacterial dysbiosis, and then they make it 10 times worse with the diet that they do to try to treat the darn thing. And then they wind up with yeast overgrowth or fungal dysbiosis. And then they're really scratching their heads, and then they're wondering why the antibiotics don't work. And then, oh, of course, you're taking antimicrobials and antibiotics for the freaking SIBO because you're treating it as an infection. And oh my God, Amy, I'm going insane. But like SIBO, the rise of SIBO in the last 5 or 10 years, I swear is directly contributing to so much more Candida. And it's a much bigger problem than it needs to be. And also, it's worth briefly saying on this mental tangent of mine, if you look at the Cedars-Sinai low fermentation diet, I know we talked about this because we did an episode on SIBO diets in the late 90s somewhere, not the 1990s, but like episode 90 something. Yeah. But remember what we talked about? And it's like, oh, if you're going to eat carbs, make sure it's white, simple carbs. And I think they say like Rice Krispie treats is a good cereal to eat. And like, don't eat whole wheat bread, eat white bread, like Wonder Bread. And it says explicitly in that handout, like, oh, go ahead and eat like cookies and cakes and stuff as long as they're sweetened with real sugar. And I look at this diet, especially that particular SIBO diet, and I'm like, this is not a low fermentation diet. This is a Candida growth diet.
Right.
Again, like, I
Well,
don't
yeah,
know.
I think again, like, well, I think it, like, both SIBO, SIFO, just large intestinal issues, like from a fungal standpoint, again, like I think they're rooted in dysbiosis, like they're rooted in all the imbalances in the gut. Like that's kind of what predisposes you in some way. Again, like if you've had antibiotics or you've had maybe an infection that kind of throws the ecosystem off. It's not the only thing, but like, you know, you almost have to, there's almost like predisposing, like you, that's an underlying factor for both Candida and SIBO. And like, then you're throwing the diet in the mix that's going to lead to more dysbiosis. And then it just is a vicious cycle.
And antimicrobials, because why the heck not?
Right. Again, like, yeah, it's wild. And I think again, like, I don't know. It's almost like one of those things where I don't know, like that perpetuates over time, like things that you just like become fact, but they're not. Like, I feel like there's like situations like that in the medical field all the time where it's like, oh, this is seen as fact. Like, oh, PPI is like totally fine to take long term. It's like, I don't know. Like there might be absolutely rare cases where like it's a must long term, but like, no, I wouldn't say it's necessarily like safe to take long term for most people. But again, like I think it's just kind of like, oh, it's benign. Like most doctors just kind of believe that, even though some of the research is coming out like, oh, you can get deficiencies and, you know, higher risk of infections and all this stuff that kind of counters that. I think again, like sometimes in like the SIBO and Candida space, it's like you have these myths that swirl around kind of like facts. And it's hard,
you have
so
to go
hard
low carb for Candida.
Right. It's like so hard to combat them because they're so entrenched, even though there's really no evidence to support any of it. Like that's kind of the wild thing. I feel like again, there's stuff in the conventional space that's kind of like that, and then again, there's a lot of things in the functional holistic space where it's like, oh, SIBO diet starves SIBO, and like that's just a common like known fact in air quotes.
But it's not a fact
right,
at all.
Exactly. There's nothing to support that. So it's like you have so much certainty swirling around in like the SIBO fungal space around like how to go about it diet wise. And again, like that's where I think the issue lies and makes our job so much more of like an uphill battle with people. It's like it's treated as fact when it's really not.
Well, and it's frustrating. And I'm sure you've had this happen too. But like, I'm told moderately frequently that it's hard for people to work with me sometimes because they've heard the same exact thing from 20 different experts, quote unquote, over the years.
Right.
And things are just accepted as fact. But and then I'm saying something completely different. Again, like everybody else has told them you need to kill the SIBO, you need to starve the SIBO, and I'm telling them, no, you don't. Or like people saying you need to kill and starve the Candida, and I'm like, no, you don't. And it's like scary for them to want to trust me because I look like the outlier. I look like the weirdo.
Right.
Who's like I'm going to treat Lyme disease with lavender oil. Ah, like I look like the nut job because I'm in the minority. But what people don't realize is that please don't treat Lyme disease with lavender essential oil, by the way. Like we talked about antibiotics in the last episode. Go check it out. But you know, like you look like the nut job when you're in the minority, but people don't realize that there's a lot of fact, air quotes, that is not actually fact. And what happens is that nobody bothers to fact check something. Like, heck, just in the last episode, I shared and I said I had read somewhere that like 90% of ear infections are viral, not bacterial. But I was very clear. I said, I don't remember where I heard that and I did not fact check it. So fact check that statistic before you run with it. That's just something I'd heard. So if I hear something that I haven't validated or like I haven't fact checked, I try to let people know Like, oh, I heard this somewhere. I don't remember where though. But I don't find that a lot of people are willing to do that.
Right. Well, and I think we all have like our own bias or like, oh, I'm going to like trust that person even though like because they're an expert, you kind of want to trust them, but in reality like some of the experts they're all just kind of repeating the same stuff. I will say too like it kind of gives parallels to like the OCD journey that I'm on. Like everyone in the anxiety OCD space a lot of times will be like do deep breathing when you're feeling really anxious, or like do these coping skills when you're feeling really anxious. Well, again, like, you know, totally different than what you would think and what you might hear is like, okay, in the OCD space, you're just supposed to sit with it and like move through it and not do anything. Like, don't do any
Yeah, like
coping.
let your body do whatever it's going to do.
Right. But like you still hear, and a lot of people with generalized anxiety would still benefit doing that type of work versus doing all these coping strategies because it makes the anxiety bigger. But it's kind of counter of what you hear of like, take a deep breath and like, you know, and you can actually hyperventilate sometimes if you do that too.
You're making it more real. You're lending more credibility to,
Right.
oh, this anxiety is a thing I really need to work on, and it's really like a big part of me.
Right. Instead of just being like, like this kind of sucks. Like, I don't love this feeling. I don't like this thought I'm having, but it's just a thought. And I'm just going to kind of sit here and let it move through me is a totally different thing. And again, like some of the people that I follow now, like kind of counter some of the traditional talking points that some therapists on anxiety have, where it's like, oh, like if you're feeling anxiety, like, you know, splash yourself in the face with cold water, like do some of these things. And it's like, those could easily become compulsory or coping strategies that maybe like make again, like the feelings bigger than they need to be, or like the thoughts bigger than they need to be. And again, I think like in the similar vein, like you could go to different specialties like that where you there's all these different ideas swirling around, and again, sometimes like a totally different look that on the surface like seems a little like, again, like on the surface, the idea of just like sitting with anxiety is like, oh shit, like that's not as sexy as doing some cool like Wim Hof breathing technique that I saw online. You know, that's not that cool.
And if I fill out this active campaign form, this person is going to send me their 10-page Wim Hof guide that I absolutely need.
Exactly. I think there's like a lot of parallels with other areas of health too, where it's like sometimes like the voices that are like kind of giving you information that's a little bit different than you would typically think can be like, you should at least give them the time of day. Like I think sometimes, again, hearing different opinions, especially if you've been trying different things and it hasn't been working, like,
well, that's the thing that kills me is like the scenario I painted where people are like, yeah, like I've followed 20 different gurus and I've seen 10 different doctors and they all have told me I need to kill the SIBO and starve the SIBO, ... And I still have all of my symptoms. They're very severe. I'm eating barely anything. And now I'm going to come see you. Like, to me, when I hear that kind of story, I get where they're coming from. Again, it does feel weird to like believe the opinion of the outlier when I'm in the minority, but also like that model did not work for you at all. Like, where is the line? Are you going to believe that that model is bullshit when you have followed 50 gurus, 100 gurus?
Right.
When you have tried 10 antimicrobials, 20 different antimicrobials, when you've seen 3 doctors, 10 doctors, 100 doctors? Like, at some point, there needs to be a threshold where you're like, this whole thing ain't working for me as an individual, at least, and I need to pursue something radically different because this is just clearly not working. So yeah, I think that is important to acknowledge. I think also like just, I don't know, exercising your bullshit radar, or if I'm going to mimic The Good Place, your bullshit radar. to some degree. Like, you just need to be good at figuring out when people are BSing you. Like,
Yeah, well, and I think that sometimes people don't think, like, they actually believe. Like, again, I think, like, some practitioners do believe, like, that this is the only way, like, to do it. Like, that's the
I
thing.
feel like
Like,
they
I
do
think,
believe it. But again, like, I'm just picturing if you did like a chemistry call or something with a practitioner,
right.
for example,
Okay.
you know, or if you were starting to work with somebody and you could like ask some questions and get a sense of like, okay, if I like push back or poke at their theory just a teeny bit, or if I'm like curious about their theory a little bit, do they seem like they're knowledgeable and well read and they can actually like back it up, or they could have an intelligent
Right.
conversation and flesh this out? Or is it something that they like wrote, memorized because they wanted to pass the IFM exam, right? Because they
Right.
wanted to be functional medicine certified. Like, you could start to get a sense of when people are BSing you, but I think that that's a skill, is just like flexing your bullshit
Right.
detector and being good at knowing when people are bluffing or when they don't know. Yeah, they don't know
Right.
what they're talking about.
Yeah. Well, I think
Um,
again, just like I almost think just reviewing your own strategies you've tried, because I'll use that strategy with clients too, of like if they're resistant to something, I'll say like, well, is what you're doing now working for you? Because like they're
oh,
coming to you for a reason. It's clearly not working. They just need to be reminded, like, is your diet really working for you right now? Like, you're still bloated and miserable. Like, could trying to add some foods in, even from a quality of life standpoint, like, is it really going to make that much of a difference? Like, from a symptom standpoint, like, let's just try it. You have nothing to lose. Like, I think, again, like, there's kind of this mentality that you have everything to lose if you like try something. Like if you try some like potatoes or something on an antifungal diet, like that, oh my God, the yeast is like gonna just bloom out of control, and it's like, no, it's not. So it's like, I think that it creates this idea that the stakes are really high when they're not, with like dietary change.
yeah. Well, and I think it paints this picture sometimes, again, like in the SIBO and the Candida space, where it's like, you have to starve it. It's us versus them. If you feed it at all, it's going to win and you're going to lose. I'm picturing like an actual legitimate battle in a war. Like,
Right.
and I know nothing about military, army, war
You
stuff. So like,
don't?
if I botch
What?
this, if I botch this, don't laugh at me too hard. But like, I'm picturing if you have the enemy army or whatever totally surrounded, you've choked off all their supplies, they're cornered, you're gonna win. It's just a matter of smoking them out. If you've got like the barrage in place and you're smoking them out, and then let's say like this platoon or whatever is like, we all are going to take a bathroom break simultaneously. We'll be back in 20 minutes. Right.
Right.
And there's like a 1 mile spans of space where there's no guards. The enemy troops are going to be like, oh my God, this is our chance. We have to run right now. And they're all going to like target that weak point in the barrage and they're all going to run out. And then, yeah, like you slack off a little bit. If one of your 20 battalions or platoons or whatever slacks off for even a couple minutes, that could cost you the battle. And it's like, that could be a big deal, but that's not how this is. It's not like all the Candida are talking to each other and they're all like conspiring, waiting for their moment. And the moment you throw in one peanut butter cup, they're like, this is our chance, boys, get them.
Right.
Like, it's
Right.
not like that. It's not like an actual war, at least to the best of our knowledge. I mean, we know that microbes talk to each other, but it's not like that degree of consciousness. It's not that degree of like planning of what you picture in like a war movie. So it really doesn't need to be this hardcore us versus them. You know, this has to be airtight. We can't slack off for even a millisecond because they're going to see our weakness and they're going to penetrate. And oh my God, we're going to lose the war. Like, it doesn't have to be like that.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And I think like I know we talked about diet a decent amount. Do we Do we want to pivot?
Yeah, I had something to share too. The other two things I wanted to talk about, I wanted to share a little bit of fresh research that I found on IBD in particular, and talk about some lesser known or lesser used antifungal compounds or like antifungal strategies.
Yeah, for sure.
I think I vote we save the antifungal strategy portion until the end of the episode in an effort to subtly and not subtly emphasize that this is the last thing that you need to work on.
Right.
Like, you don't start anti-candida efforts by trying to kill the candida. You start an anti-candida campaign by making sure you have good dietary diversity, plenty of fiber, and you're doing the unsexy, unglamorous, basic B, just general, hey, keep you healthy kind of stuff, and make sure that you, the host, are as healthy as possible. And then maybe after you do that for a while, you get into some antifungal compounds. In my opinion, that's how it should work.
Right. It's almost like if you were going to use that analogy of like you have an army, even though that's not how it works, but like you have an army. Like, do you want to go into war being totally untrained, without the right weapons, without like knowing where you're going, no maps? I think of that like a lot of the unsexy stuff is like equipping you with maps, equipping you with like training, equipping you with maybe like good advisors. Like, again, it's like, how can you build a body that's going to be able to like essentially support the journey? If again, like all you're doing is throwing antifungals in the mix, I feel like you're going in with like a strategy that would be similar to like, going in with like untrained soldier. Like you might kill some, you might like kind of like make some dents, but like you're not going to have any like strategy to prevent further wars. Like, again, it's like there's no nuance to it. It's just kind of, I don't know.
I like this. This
Yeah.
might have to become like an Instagram carousel post or something.
Yeah.
Because I think that's beautiful. I'll take it up an ante. I think, you know how like the Army ROTC recruiter people will go to like a high school
Yeah.
and they're plucking kids out of there like, hey, you 17-year-old with acne, like,
Right.
you awkward teenage kid, come join the army. Imagine that. Imagine an army of like pimple-faced, clueless teenagers who have had zero training. They enroll in the army or Marines or whatever floats your boat. They enroll in the armed forces, and the very first day they're like, we're just going to skip training. We're going to skip preparing you, and we're going to send you right now to the war zone. Good luck. But you equip them, in this case, the antimicrobials could be like bazookas and cannons. So you give a bunch of pimple-faced, clueless teenagers fresh out of high school, day one
Right.
in the armed forces, you give them a bunch of bazookas and like wave at them and say, good luck. Like,
Right,
they
right.
might take out some of the enemy troops just because
Right.
they have bazookas. But you're going to have a lot more collateral damage. You're going to have a lot more chaos, and it's going to be
Right,
a
it's like
scramble. It's going to be an uphill battle.
Right. Like they might win like one battle just because like no one was expecting bazookas, and then they're
Maybe.
surrounded, and like, yeah, I think it's a good analogy. Like you have no strategy, like no leadership.
Yeah,
no
yeah, and like
training.
the commander and the chief and all of the higher ups are also pimple-faced teenagers straight out of high
Right.
school, and they have no clue what they're doing either.
Right.
Yeah,
The
versus
blind
if you
leading the
could-
blind.
Yeah, if you could take that same group of pimple-faced teenagers and you could run them through basic training for, I don't know, how long is it even? 6 months? I don't know. But if you could like train them up for a while before you send them into the enemy territory, they probably will need fewer bazookas, which in this case would be a lower dose of antimicrobials, and it's going to be a much more effective campaign as opposed to the chaos that we just painted. Again, this has to be an Instagram carousel post, and I have to find like the best Google image photo of just like a really pimply, awkward looking teenager. I'm picturing like Napoleon Dynamite, but younger with a lot more acne.
Right.
If I could just find somebody on like a Google image search who embodies that degree of awkwardness, and then I'm just going to like copy paste and replicate this kid
Right.
a million times. It's good.
Oh
That's what
my
I'm
gosh.
picturing in this carousel post that I'm hypothesizing. But I love this analogy. This episode is rock solid. I've got my broccoli ad that I'm totally going to do.
Yes.
And I've got my
Yes.
pimple face teenager army carousel. I'm going to write it down right now. Pimple army. I'm going to shorthand it in the interest of time.
Yes.
And now I'm going to look at that
Excellent.
note. I'm going to look at the note that says pimple army, and I'm going to be like, what?
Yeah, you're gonna like totally space about what you meant.
Well, actually, I'll remember what it was. But if Mike saw my to-do list, he would be like, what the F is that? He'd be so confused.
I think it was so funny. Speaking of that, I had like a post-it note where I was like writing like an outline for something for like a post, or maybe it was like a podcast. I don't know, but I put unsupportive partner like in it was a list of, I think it was like things that you wouldn't expect to hold you back on a journey. I think I did like a reel or something. So I had like 5 or 6 points of like things that you wouldn't think of that could like prevent progress. But I didn't like label it. I just put like unsupportive partner. Like I was like writing stuff, and he came to me. He's like, well, what's that post-it note like in your office? And I was like,
Are you trying to very
that's for a
subtly
post.
tell me something?
Right. I was like, that's for a post. He was like all concerned. I'm like, it's fine.
Poor Armand. He was all confused.
Now, if you saw
No.
a post-it note with like diarrhea or like poop
That would be par
stuff,
for the
you
course
would-
for you.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, wonderful, rock solid analogy or metaphor. True confession time. I almost never remember the difference between a metaphor and an analogy when I'm actually speaking out loud. I'm going to have to Google it again for the millionth time. I'm also pretty bad about remembering which one is which between effect and effect.
Oh, I'm horrible at that too.
I have it written down on my board next to me. Just permanently, I have it written. So I remember which one is the one with the E and which one is with the A. I'm good with all the other confusing words.
You know what? I
like
remember
there,
another one
there.
that you don't know. A word. Skull. Remember? Isn't that one that you like?
That one's a
mix
very
up?
specific brain lesion. Only rowers would understand that. But
Right.
yes, you're right. I never remember if it's a C or K because, okay, now we have to catch people up. So I was a rower, and when you row, when each rower has one oar, it's called sweeping. When each rower has 2 oars, one in each hand, it's called sculling. And it's spelled the other way. So like whichever one is the way that the anatomy skull is spelled, sculling is spelled the other way. So I always get them mixed up. I'm 99% sure that the anatomy skull is with a K and the sport sculling is with a C, but I don't even know. I'm still trying to figure this out. And I started rowing like 20 years ago. And I still haven't mastered this, but I will. I will, darn it.
There's still
Anyway,
time.
Moving on. Little brain lesions aside, we all have them. The IBD thing. I had a couple of things to share that I found. So there was a moderately new, about 1-year-old paper that I found where basically they said people who have IBD. So they acknowledge that practically everybody has some Candida, but the long and short of it is that people with IBD might have strains of Candida that are particularly virulent and particularly inflammatory. And they even said in one of the articles that I found, I don't remember which one now, but they said something about, individual Candida albicans yeast strains in the human gut are as different from each other as the humans that carry them. So getting into strain specificity stuff, like, if you take a probiotic that's labeled Lactobacillus acidophilus and you don't know what strain it is, you don't really know what you're going to get. You don't know if this is the particular type that can help with respiratory infections or if this is the one that's been shown to help with gut stuff. So It's kind of like the equivalent when we talk about Candida albicans or Lactobacillus acidophilus or Bifidobacterial longum. When we talk about a species, that's the equivalent of saying Homo sapien.
Right.
And like we could get some information that way, right? Like we could say like Akkermansia seems to really like polyphenols. But that's kind of like saying all humans like pizza. It's mostly true, but you know there are those freaks out there who exist and they do not like pizza, right? So there's
Right.
always going to be the weirdos of the world. And similarly, like saying, oh, Candida albicans likes sugar. Well, there are human beings alive today that don't like chocolate, and I do not understand
Right.
them for the life of me. Like, make sense of that one.
Right.
So we can only get so specific when we talk about a species,
Right.
whether we're talking about, you know, an animal, a plant, a fungus, or a bacteria. So they made the point of saying that the strains of Candida albicans are all unique. They said that people with ulcerative colitis, in this case, had high damaging Candida strains, which turned out to have a key factor in common. They all produce the Candida lysin toxin. And then they showed that that toxin basically produced an ulcerative colitis like state when it was when they took the yeast and they transplanted it into mice. It produced like the mouse equivalent of ulcerative colitis. And they were able to show, I think this was like culturing it on petri dishes. They were able to show that that Candida lysin toxin and the Candida that produce it revs up the inflammatory arm of the immune system, which we'll talk a little bit more about in the next episode, but it revved up something called Th17 cells. It revved up neutrophils. It revved up something called IL-1 beta. So it really turned on the inflammatory process versus a normal strain of Candida might not do that, or a strain that does not produce this toxin might not do that. So pretty interesting stuff. Also, there has been
Right.
some research that suggests that people with IBD have more Candida. So like there's the quantity piece of it and also the quality, like the strain that you
Right.
carry and how nasty it is, how much toxin it produces, how virulent it is. And both things seem to be involved in IBD, both in Crohn's and colitis. Then just one more factoid, and then we'll talk about this a little bit more. There was another study. This was end of 2021. They found that basically, like normally in the gut, we would produce antibodies as part of the immune response against Candida. We would produce antibodies against that, and it would bind up any Candida that we're getting persnickety. So any of them that were morphing from the single cellular non-pathogenic yeast form to their more aggressive form, when you start getting the bigger Candida that have hyphae and they get more aggressive, that's what secretory IgA seems to bind to. So they were saying, like, in a normal gut, you would have all this antibody production, and the antibodies preferentially bind to the hyphae of the more virulent forms of Candida. So it's taking care of hyphae, it's taking care of that form of Candida when it occurs.
Right.
But the production of those antibodies and the like the action of those antibodies seems to be compromised in people with IBD. So we're getting kind of this like magic crappy place of like, ooh, you have more Candida than the average bear, probably, if you have IBD. Also, the strains that you carry are just nastier than most of them. So they're making a lot more toxins. You're revving up a heck of an inflammatory immune response, and your immune system's going bonkers. And the part of your immune system that would actually be beneficial and would bind to the hyphae and get rid of the virulent forms of the Candida, well, that part of the immune system isn't working so hot. So it's like the quadruple whammy for people with IBD.
Yeah. Oof. 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 Yeah.
Anyway, that's what I got. So you can comment or share beyond that. But I don't know how much
Yeah,
you have
no,
worked
that's-
with IBD and if you've seen Candida be a big thing for them.
Typically, I don't work with IBD. it's kind of like a personal preference, I guess. Like in terms, I just feel like it's a little bit more inflammatory and like potentially requires a little bit more collaboration.
Could you face your microphone, love?
Oh, sorry. Sorry, a little bit.
Amy's talking to the other side of the room.
It's a little bit more, again, inflammatory and requires, I think, a little bit more collaboration with other medical providers. And again, like I've had less experience with it, so I've kind of always steered a little bit more clear of it. It's actually kind of one of the, kind of depends though. Like some people that might have a little bit of like microscopic, like I've worked with some people with like some microscopic colitis or like, kind of where it's not super progressed, but like still some inflammation going on that could be autoimmune to some degree. But, again,
That
like
makes sense.
less outright Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. I typically don't work a ton with those populations, but still really interesting that tends to be a lot of connection with like how Candida could maybe bloom more efficiently in that kind of environment.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it makes sense. Like, I do work with both, not as much. I think most of the people who seek me out have IBS or SIBO. But I've worked with both Crohn's and colitis. It's higher stakes, like a flare.
Yeah.
And this is not to poo-poo anybody with IBS or SIBO, but generally the flare for somebody with IBS or SIBO is not life-threatening, and it's not as big of a deal. But like if you get somebody with a really nasty flare of ulcerative colitis, that could potentially be life-threatening, or
Right.
it could at the very least, it could be very, very scary.
Right.
So I get why some people wouldn't want to work with that population because it is much higher stakes,
Right.
particularly if they're really flared up. But it does seem like there's more of a propensity towards Candida in that population. I wonder too, because there is some research on FMT for that population. And I know that there's a whole wide world of like people with IBD who do at-home FMT, just ongoing with like a donor from their family. And they do that like just continuously. It makes me wonder if that's a big part of why. Because if you think about it, if you're introducing more bacteria and you're increasing or helping your diversity somehow with FMT, like that could help ward off this Candida potentially, as long as the donor you get a donation from doesn't have Candida, I suppose.
Right.
That's a whole nother headache to think about the screening process there. And I know also, I think I've seen some stuff with FMT research where like, if you have a lot of yeast, the FMT transfer will be less successful.
Interesting. I know where I went. I heard the guy Glenn. Now I'm second guessing on his name. It's been a while since Glenn Taylor or something like that is the head microbiologist that works at the Tame Out. I've heard him talk on some podcasts, and what he said was really interesting. He said that they have fairly good success with ulcerative colitis and Crohn's. He said it's just very important that they're not in an acute flare when they get because they said again, like it can kind of rev up the immune system in a way. Like if they expose them to a ton of new bacteria, when they're in a flare, it can kind of flare them up even more. So like he said, it can sometimes be a bit heartbreaking because people like travel to go see them. And then it's like, oh, you're in a flare. Like we can't do this now. You got to like come back.
Yeah.
Which again, like if
Yeah.
you're
I
traveling
mean,
across multiple countries could be bad, but like again, they don't want to risk it. He said too that sometimes with ulcerative colitis, like it's always hard, like what is considered remission for people, but he said usually it requires more FMTs. So like, you know, if you just have dysbiosis and no IBD, doing a FMT is going to correct the dysbiosis pretty efficiently in a shorter period of time. Whereas like, again, ulcerative colitis, he said you can almost get to a state, if I remember right, where like there's not really lesion. Like you almost couldn't tell that the person had UC. Like you could almost get to that point, but it requires a lot of FMT. So like he said, it's not just like you get 10 hits like a normal person or 5 hits for someone that has C. diff. Like he'd want to do more long-term FMTs is typically like what he suggested when he's worked with UC patients. But I always found that kind of interesting.
That makes sense. I guess it's like how deeply rooted the dysbiosis is and the inflammatory process. Like it would make sense that UC would require a lot more. I think what I know of these conditions, especially UC, there's pretty clear research that patients with UC have compromised microbial diversity, which again, we talked about earlier. Reduced bacterial diversity in the gut is going to lead to more opportunity for the Candida to really bloom out of control and rear its ugly head.
Right.
So it would make sense that doing dietary strategies and things like FMT to try to build that diversity and build up the bacterial microbiome would be really helpful.
Right.
Because, it seems like Candida is a pretty genuine issue for people with IBD, for sure. So, thought that was worthy of attention. And again, just bringing up, like, we've talked recently about the idea that no test is perfect. And, everybody wants the GI map and the OAT test and this test and this test. And it's like, we could do stool testing. I do stool testing, but I never put like 100% of my faith in it, because even if I were to do a stool test that looks for Candida, or if I did like an OAT test and looked at metabolites for Candida, that doesn't tell you anything about the strain that you're carrying and like how virulent it is. Like you could have a little bit more Candida than the average person, but maybe yours is a pussycat and it's not doing anything and it's like super chill as far as Candida goes.
Right.
Or maybe you have like a more moderate amount of Candida, but it's super nasty. Right? Like measuring the quantity of Candida albicans doesn't really tell you if you need to treat it, I think.
Right. And I feel like, again, like it's probably in the context of the microbiome as a whole too. Because again, like, do you even have like a balanced fungal ecosystem across the board? Like, do you have, maybe there's some different types of like yeast or different types of fungal strains of different microbes that like that combination works really well for you, but you might have a little higher of this strain compared to this strain, and that seems to work. Like there's so much we don't. I think the thing that has struck me the longer I work in the space is like just respecting what we don't know too about some of this stuff. Like we don't necessarily know all the ins and outs, especially of like the fungal microbiome. I feel like we're still kind of in the infancy of figuring that out. And I think part of the problem is like, because the like functional space was so like crazy with like yeast, like again, like it was totally discredited by like you know, the conventional medical yeast system was like, oh, right. It's like the conventional space is saying, oh, that doesn't exist except in like extremely immunocompromised people, which like that's again like how it's potentially showing up in the conventional space when they can like test for it and see it. It might be like the severe version. And there's definitely probably a spectrum there, but I feel like probably what happened is like no one really wanted to touch the like fungal yeast microbiome stuff because it felt a little bit more like woo. Right. Even though that they're, and again, like a lot of the functional and holistic approaches to Candida are woo. So like I can understand that somewhat, but it's like we still need to probably research a lot more about the fungal microbiome and like how it interacts with the other microbes in the gut and in and of itself, like how different fungal species interact. Like I think we just aren't there yet. And that's something to just like keep in mind too.
Not. Yeah, we are absolutely not there. You know, just think about it this way. We know so much less about the fungal microbiome than we do the bacterial microbiome.
Right.
And if you think about how much we know and how much we don't know about the bacterial microbiome, it's one of those things like you're either going to laugh or you're going to cry, because it's
Right.
either hilarious how little we know or it's really sad how little we know about the bacterial microbiome. Like 80% of the microbiome in the gut, the bacteria, 80% of the bacteria cannot be cultured at all. And about
Right.
50% of the bacteria that live in the gut don't even have a name yet,
Right.
let alone research on whether they're good or they're bad, what they produce, what they eat, who they get along with, who they don't get along with, what they do with candida, what they do with the gut lining. You know, if there's like bacteria 4718220, like nobody's going to be funding research to research that bacteria yet because it
Right.
doesn't even have a freaking name. So
Right.
like if we are that much in the infancy of our understanding about the bacterial microbiome, to this point that 50% of bacteria don't even have names, and we know like 1/100th the amount of knowledge about the fungal microbiome compared to the bacterial microbiome, it just paints this picture of like we know almost nothing about the bacteria to begin with, and then we know
Right.
like 1/100th that amount of the fungus. So
But
it's
we
like
know, Nikki, that we can starve them.
we
We know we
absolutely
can
know.
starve them.
Absolutely. No sugar,
Right.
no fruit, no nothing. You know what's funny, actually?
Right.
Let me go back to that. Thank you for that segue. Bacteria, or I'm sorry, the idea that you need to cut out fruit for candida is ludicrous just from the perspective we just shared. We probably can't starve candida genuinely. But also, they did do a petri dish study a couple years back where they basically like cultured candida on a plate with glucose, one plate with lactulose, I think, and one plate with fructose. Candida really only likes glucose, from what we could tell.
Yeah.
It did not grow, it did not favor fructose or lactulose at all. Even though they're sugars,
Right.
it really didn't give a shit, pun intended, about those sugars. It really only liked glucose. So, you know, the idea that you have to cut out fruit because it has sugar, doesn't make sense because it's more fructose-based sugar compared to like table sugar anyway. But also, even if you look at like the high glucose fruits like grapes and dates and stuff like that, those foods still have polyphenols and fiber and like vitamins and minerals, and all of those things can help keep your immune system or your bacterial microbiome healthy and strong so that they're better able to fight the candida. So even I don't even know if like the high glucose fruits are something to be concerned about in and of themselves. I don't know, but I'm glad that I remembered to make that point because that's something that's not widely known, that candida really doesn't give a flying fig about fructose.
Right.
So
Right.
you
No,
know,
I love that.
eat the mango.
Love
I don't
that.
know.
Love that point.
Yes. Shall we,
Cool.
do you want to make brief mention of testing for candida and how abysmal it is? I will share, video, I did a video on my channel this pretty recently, like maybe a month prior to this, about, I did 2 organic acids tests from the same pee sample from the same day and mailed them both in, and they were reasonably consistent. There was a couple of markers where they differed from sample to sample, but most of the metabolites were reasonably consistent between the 2 samples. My next kind of leg of the journey, now that I've verified that you can at least get similar results from 2 different samples, which I cannot say for every lab test available. Followers of my channel know what I'm talking about. I will not name names. But now that I know that they at least have the consistency piece down, I'm going to be doing a deep dive in the next month or two to try to validate the markers of the oat test and see, like, can this actually diagnose candida? My understanding from the little bit I've read on this so far, and also following a colleague who I think very highly of, and he did a deep dive on this, is that no, the oat test and like the
Right.
urinary metabolites are not validated at all. And they're not going to tell you if you have candida. But then that stinks because then stool testing also doesn't probably do a great job of diagnosing candida. And
Right.
blood tests, I don't know how good blood tests are. See, I'm opening this can of worms because once I debunk the oat test as an option, I basically have to explore all the other options.
Right.
And I think I'm going to leave myself with the conclusion that we cannot test for candida accurately in this day and age from a commercially available laboratory. And that's going to be really depressing.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I don't know if you do any tests
I'd
for candida.
agree. I usually I'll like look at stuff if a client is really adamant on testing. Honest to God, like I've probably moved well away from testing. I used to do more Great Plains oat testing, and I always like originally thought, oh, that's a good option. But at the same time, it's like, well, what if someone eats a yeast and then it shows up? Or like, what if, like, again, like, there's so many potential problems with it being a urine test. Or again, like, what if someone had a weird, gnarly yeasty ear like I did? And it might not necessarily be like a microbiome problem, more like an ear problem or a ear microbiome problem more than like a gut microbiome problem. So I think like it's just it's problematic in a number of ways. And again, like typically what I do now is like I'll try to assess if someone's potential for fungal overgrowth. Again, like have they responded well to things that might have helped with fungus in the past? Like, do they have thrush? Like, do they have a history of vaginal yeast infection? Like, do they have any historical markers that would point towards yeast? What do their symptoms look like? How have they responded to antibiotics? Have they taken a lot of antibiotics? Like, there's different things to consider here. And I think, like, probably a thorough case review would be really helpful. And then, like, if I suspect it, I'll almost just try something. Like, if I'm going to try something, like, specifically for yeast, I'll usually do, like, some sort of undisciplinaric acid or, that would probably be my favorite antifungal. So like sometimes I'll try.
You hold on. You turned away from the microphone and then wrapped the microphone with your hand as you were saying this. We love Amy for her brains, but she was maybe not bred to be a podcaster specifically. Talk into the microphone and tell the good people what your favorite is. This is the one thing they really want to hear.
I want it to be like my favorite is, you know.
We're gonna hate you so much.
I know. They're really hanging on my words. But like undisciplinaric acid, I never know how to pronounce it. Like the SF722, which I will say is the worst name for a supplement. No way, really?
Yes, and now it's just called undecilinic or whatever it is acid, which is worse because now all of us have to pronounce that and we have to like remember how to spell that damn thing when we're writing up notes for our patients. But yes, I recommended that product maybe like a month ago, and somebody was like, I tried to search for SF722, but I can't find it. Is this what you're talking about? And I was like, oh, figured thorn. Yes, that's it. Darn it. So anyway, yeah, it's the big long word that we're having trouble with. Undecilinic.
Yeah,
I feel like I normally can pronounce it when you're not around. You're getting in my head and you're messing with me right now.
Okay, this is like the whole Pimental thing.
Yes, Pimental. Absolutely.
Pimental thing.
This is payback for Pimental.
Right.
Yeah, I like that too. And the thing is, it's really well tolerated and it's gentle enough, but it's still very effective. So that is the one antimicrobial for Candida where I would be willing to try it pretty willy-nilly because I think it's kind of like no harm, no foul. So I will oftentimes have people try that out, kind of what you indicated, treating it empirically, meaning
like try it for a
testing.
month or something. Like try it for a period of time and just see like, does it work? Does it not? Like if it really isn't making a dent, I'd just like maybe move on. Or again, like try maybe one other thing. Like if you're for really thinking this has to be a thing, but I don't know. Like that's typically what I would do.
I'm glad you mentioned. You said maybe try one other thing. I think it's worthy noting that like some people get really hell-bent on the idea that they have Candida.
Right.
And like relentlessly pursuing it. And they get into this mind spiral of like, I just haven't found the right antimicrobial yet. I just need to keep pursuing that route. And like, it's the same kind of thing we talked about either in this episode or the last one, where it's like the definition of insanity being doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Like, I know that different antifungals can work differently and maybe they can work better on certain strains. But if you've gotten to the point where you have tried, 3, 4, 5, or heaven forbid more antifungals and it's still not helping you, maybe you just don't have a fungal issue, right? Like maybe you need to pursue something else. And there's a guy, I won't share too much about his case, but basically like a topical antifungal had been helpful. So he's was thinking, oh, I have candida in my gut because like this anal itching, like the topical antifungal is the only thing that really works. Well, I looked up the mechanism of action and like some stuff about that particular antifungal, and it turns out, like rifaximin, it also has some anti-inflammatory and immune modulating properties. So I was like, I kind of approached this a couple times. I don't know if it really resonated, but I said, I get why you see that. You see that you had a positive response to one antifungal and therefore you assume it's a fungal thing. I get that, but also there is a possibility that maybe that drug helped you not because it was killing candida, but because it was doing something for inflammation or your immune system. And maybe you're chasing the wrong thing here. Again, I think it fell on deaf ears a little bit. I don't think he was super like into that idea, and he was still pretty convinced. But that's something to keep in mind is like, if you've tried a lot of different antifungals, it just might be that you don't have a fungal issue.
Right. I agree.
But certainly SF722 is very safe. You could try that. Some others, you segued into my list, some others that I don't know if we specifically mentioned in our other Candida episode. Noni, specifically a lot of the research on Noni is with the juice, which I don't think a lot of people are using. But Noni fruit extract, which you can find in like capsules, sometimes that is helpful. I've had some people do really well with Noni. Again, the thing is that a lot of the research I've seen on Noni is using the juice. It's not using like the dried shit in the capsules.
Right.
So I don't even know where that plant grows. I don't know how you would acquire Noni juice. Somebody needs to start a business and sell it on Amazon because I think a lot of people would want it. But that's a potential possibility. Another one, I tried to look this up on PubMed and I found basically nothing on it. But there was one post on Facebook a couple years ago. It was in one of those like IBS SIFO groups, which I don't really go in there very often, but every now and then I'll just kind of scroll to get ideas for my YouTube channel and like figure out like what questions are people asking, what are people talking about. Maybe I should make videos to try to answer some of the questions I see in here.
Right.
And I saw this post that somebody did about how parsley tea was like the most wonderful, helpful thing for their candida. And they were saying you go to the grocery store, you get a bunch of parsley, you take half the bunch of parsley, you throw it in some water, you warm up the water on the stovetop, you strain it off, you've got some parsley tea, drink that a time or two a day. But she was singing the praises of the parsley tea and said that it was the only thing that helped with candida. I have no idea where she found that information because I cannot find it on PubMed anywhere, but that maybe is worth considering. And it's very cheap and very safe to do that, which I like. So that's a consideration. I found a very cool study, well, several, but one in particular, showing that butyrate decreases candida.
Yeah.
Which is perfect because where do we get butyrate? From our good bugs. Bacteria. And how do they make butyrate? When you feed them fiber and FODMAPs and whole grains. Oh my God, it's like we've gone full circle. There's a method to the madness. But they said, and I quote, this particular article said that butyrate strongly inhibited candida growth in a concentration-dependent manner. So eat all of those butyrate producing foods so that your butyrate producing microbes are happy schmappy and you'll be off to the races. Butyrate also inhibited virulence factors and inhibited biofilm formation of Candida.
Wow.
It's a freaking all-star.
It is an all-star.
And then just a couple more. Again, lesser players that we haven't talked about before. I found one article that cabbage juice is helpful.
I've heard that for like gastritis and like H. pylori scenario.
Yeah, like
more
the
so.
vitamin U kind of stuff. Yeah, I saw apparently anti-candida effect. Also, indole-3 carbinol, which is found in cruciferous vegetables, also exhibits an anti-candida effect. So again, like all the people who have been told that they have to do low FODMAP, they can't eat anything that's gassy, or heaven forbid if they're doing a low sulfur diet because they think they have hydrogen sulfide SIBO, or they've been told that they have hydrogen sulfide SIBO, like they're cutting out all the cruciferous vegetables when those things would be helping with candida control. So eat your cruciferous veggies, your brassica veggies. And then the last one to just share is probiotics in general probably would help with candida, but in particular, there's a lot on lactobacillus species.
Yep.
So like lactobacilli in a couple different studies I saw produced antifungal compounds, altered yeast metabolic function, compromised the structural integrity of the yeast cells, competed with candida for binding sites on the epithelium. So there's no parking spaces for the candida to attach to. Lactobacilli stimulates host immunity against candida and maybe can help raise secretory IgA, which we talked about, binds with candida hyphae and helps get rid of candida. So, and I don't know if I said biofilm. Lactobacilli also inhibit biofilm formation of candida. So we need to be using lactobacilli with candida, whether it be from food or probiotic supplements or both. But oh my goodness, power to the lactobacilli.
Snaps for lactobacilli.
That's right. I can't really snap well with the one hand. The right's good now. Left, I've got to work on a little bit. I'm very clearly
I do pointer and thumb.
Oh, I'm doing middle finger and thumb.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I feel like that one doesn't come naturally to me. You know what's weird though? This is like now your little about us section of the podcast. I learned as an adult that I hold my pencil or pen really weird. And like, I forget how this came up, but like somebody in college, like one of my roommates or one of my teammates was like, why do you hold it like that? Yeah. Normal people hold it like kind of gracefully. I write like I'm angry all the time. My pen is like straight up and down and I'm like holding it in death grip like this. I don't know why. But like
maybe, you know how over years of talking to you, you've tried different things to get your HRV up. Maybe changing your pencil hold. Maybe it's the stress of your
But you know
writing.
What's weird? You know what's weird though? You would think because I hold the pen and pencil like super weird, you would think that I have no artistic talent, but I do.
Yeah.
I mean, like you see paintings behind me, but I'm not like a crazy good drawer, but I'm not a bad drawer either.
Right.
Like I could doodle a sketch or I could write something with pencil and you could see what I'm going for sure. It might not be like lifelike. But yeah, you would think that I have no artistic talent with the way I hold the pen or pencil, but I kind of do, which is funny. Maybe I would be that much better if I hold it like a normal person.
You'd be like the next, I don't know any artists. I don't know any artists, but you'd be the next artist on
That's
the
right. May I wrap us up on a very weird but hilarious note?
We have the boob is filling.
Okay. Righty is
feeling
perturbed.
Righties get screaming.
Well, I think this will be worth it. So I saw this post on Instagram between recordings. I sent it to you so you could relive this on Instagram, but I'm going to read it because I thought it was that profound. Okay, so the person said, it's a little bit of a story, but hang in there. While I worked at Subway in my early 20s, I made many questionable sandwiches. But there was one I will never forget. I think about this sandwich at least once a week. It haunts my nightmares. I sincerely worry about the person who ordered it. This early dinner time shift, 5-6 p.m., there were 3 of us working the line, all 20-somethings, because at the time, all the big adults had quit or been fired. Our store was run by kids for about a month. A group of high school-aged kids came in. I served the second girl in the group. She wanted a foot-long on white bread. Cool. Double provolone and double American cheese. I could respect that. Does she want it toasted? No. Veggies? No. Sauce? Yes. Ranch, please. Now, I'm not denying people who have the taste buds of a toddler the privilege of watching your sandwich come together before your very eyes behind a curved pane of glass covered with fingerprints and sneezes of those who came before them. They deserve Subway too. However, this girl wanted ranch dressing, so I put ranch, 2 lines, on her sandwich. More, please. I put 2 more lines of ranch on her sandwich. More, please. I put another 2 lines. Her, visibly annoyed, more than that, I am beginning to become concerned. I add more. At this point, the cheese, the only other thing on the bread, is nearly obscured. She's irritated now. Just keep going. I stare at her, refillable squeeze bottle in hand. You want more than this? Her, yeah, I'll tell you when to stop. My soul exits my body as I continue to squirt ranch dressing onto her sandwich. It's more of an open-faced soup at this point. I look at her, expecting her to tell me to stop. She doesn't. She wants more. Her friends are looking over like look at the picture.
Oh my God.
People with normal human-style sandwiches are passing her in the line.
Oh my God.
Okay, well, I've got to get it together, Nikki. Got to get it together. People with normal human-style sandwiches are passing her in the line. Her friends are already paying and sitting down. I don't look at her anymore. I look at my manager standing beside me. He shrugs. We are broken people. I guess use the other bottle. I must have eventually satisfied her demands for ranch dressing. I weakly asked if she would like salt or pepper. No. I don't know how I wrapped that thing. I must have blacked out. I just remember how wet it was. She paid for that monstrosity and then sat down and ate with her friends, seemingly without incident. I don't know how. I will never understand how. If I think about it too long, my mind will collapse in on itself. Imagine the eldritch horror or the worst sandwich I ever made. Oh my God. Can you?
Oh my God.
Can you imagine? Can you just imagine like the sheer amount of ranch dressing that this girl wanted? You might as well just go to the store and buy a bottle of ranch dressing and drink it at that point.
Oh
I don't know why
God.
you pay overpriced prices at Subway for that.
Right. Well, it's too much. It's too much.
I love that so much when I read it. I told myself that has to be our closer for this episode.
Yes. Brilliant.
Because it's rare that you find utter complete perfection on the internet, and I think I found it in that post.
You did.
So
excellent.
That's
Good
all
work.
I got. Speaking of Instagram, I realized recently we have not shared our Instagram handles. What if the good people want to follow us, Amy, and they don't know how? What is your Instagram handle, my dear?
Amy __ Hollenkamp _RD. I almost forgot after like the ranch dressing story just burned my brain.
She's delirious now with ranch dressing floating in her brain. Yes, yours is easy because it's your name. Mine, I had to be extra, as the kids would say. So mine is gut.microbiome.queen. And my YouTube channel is a similar name, Dr. Daneza Gut Microbiome Queen. I crowned myself. How about that? But I think that's a wrap now that we shared that. We'll see you in the next episode. Per our usual, keep it real out there. If you're on YouTube, subscribe, like, comment, do all the things. If you're on a podcasting app, we would deeply appreciate 5-star reviews, assuming you think we earn them. And we'll see you in the next episode. But be away with you and go empty that boob, Amy.
I will do that.